Okay, how do you pursue those values while working with other professionals, healthcare providers, etc.? Have you ever had to or wondered if you should protect your clients from the behaviors that you as a social worker considered unethical? That's a fantastic question. I love that. I think the hardest thing to do in social work is to balance out the needs of the individual with that of their community, society, and sometimes the setting that they're in. Sometimes you really do have to stand up for people against the organization that they're a part of and that you're working into. If you're a police social worker, sometimes you have to stand against police officers, and you're working with them every day. So I think from your previous question about, do I think other professions need to have those values? Yes, and like I said before, they really don't always have all of those values or beliefs because they don't have that education. That's not part of their background. So I think working with other professions can get pretty difficult, and I think that's the best kind of examples I'd come up with that are people, social workers who work in secondary settings, school social workers, hospital social workers, and police social workers. They've really got their work cut out for them, because on a daily basis they're surrounded by people who don't share that background, and after a while it's like anything else. If you're not constantly immersed in it, like a language or anything, all of a sudden you'll tend to forget it if you don't have that as part of what's going on around you every day. So yes, have I ever had to protect my clients from things that I consider unethical? Yeah, that's part of what comes with the job. Probably the easiest and best example that I could give off the top of my head, is one time I was working at a homeless shelter, and I was working there by myself, and we opened up for what's called cold shelter, which means everyone can come in. So I had 3 different rooms I was supposed to monitor that weren't connected, and about 150 people in the shelter at the time. It was very difficult. Obviously, questions about my safety and things like that, came into, were needed to be brought up, and I talked to my supervisor about it, and basically got the answer that where there's budget cuts, so we can't afford to have anybody else on with you. I said, okay, fine. And later on, what happened is we would run background checks on some of the people that would come in on the sex offender registry online, and in that particular shelter, 13-year-olds were considered adults. 13-year-old boys wouldn't be able to sleep with their mom, so they were sent over to the male side. So I had a single 13-year-old boy sleeping on the men's side, and his mom and his sisters were on the women's side of that shelter. The problem with not being able to watch all 3 rooms at once, sometimes there was fights or things like that. But what I had noticed was that a convicted a child predator, a sex offender, who had actually just been paroled to the shelter for that, was now sleeping. He laid his mat on the floor right next to the 13-year-old boy. So I had a problem with that. I moved him, and I addressed the concerns with the rest of staff and my supervisor. And my supervisor had told me then, her background wasn't social work, that's a protected status, and I had no right to discuss any of that, with the other employees, at the shelter. And I let her know that it wasn't, and my concern was basically for the safety of this kid, and basically we got an email response to the rest of the organization that we're not to do anything, and to leave the whole situation alone. And so at that point, the idea of integrity and what do I do, and how do I get this resolved? Is it more important for me to get along with my supervisor than in my views to protect the safety of this boy? So I went to my supervisor and discussed my concerns with her, and about a week later I got called in my supervisor's office, and was told that I was being written up for that, and I said, well, that's fine, I'll be written up for that. And my problem, I think, was probably that I was a little smug about it, that I so willingly accepted a write-up without being personally offended. So a few days after that, they had said something something else, that I had done something on a computer or something, and there was no way it was possible. I wasn't even working at the time. But anyhow, they fired me, and I actually kind of took that as a little bit of a badge of honor. I mean, normally you're not really holding your head up high if you're fired for something, but in my eyes, I made sure that I did the right thing regardless of the consequences. And my lesson in social work has been that you're going to do the right thing, and people are going to hate you for it. So especially a lot of times people from other professions, especially when you're supposed to work with them every day, and their belief is that you need to be more of a team player than to do your job. And I think that's where it gets really tricky for a lot of social workers in a lot of secondary settings. But I think the idea of integrity and maintaining those values is more important for social work than for a lot of other professions, because people go to police and firefighters for safety, and teachers for education, and priests for religious and spiritual guidance, and lawyers for legal justice. But eventually they come to social workers when they're really desperate, and they feel like society has abandoned them. And sometimes they're right. And social work tends to delve into the aspects of the human experience that most people in the United States would rather not think about. When people are getting older and experiencing dementia, we're there. And when people are dying, we're there. When people are living in a family or neighborhood where drugs and crime are normal, we're there. People are being physically, mentally, or emotionally abused, we're there too. And when people are feeling ashamed, guilty, or abandoned, we're there. And most people, when they get off of work at night, don't really have the energy or capacity or even want to think about those parts of society and those parts of the world that are happening. And that's what we do every day. So our job is very much values based. When you're working with people who are desperate, they're very vulnerable. And if you can't maintain those values regardless of the outcome, because that's just what is the right thing to do based off of what your education has taught you. For me, it comes down to talking to other social workers sometimes when I'm not quite sure about what I should do. So but if you're not prepared to do that, if you're not prepared to do the right thing and be hated for it, or do what ethically you should do and be fired for it. And I mean in the real world. It's one thing to say it in class and to judge people and point the finger when you're not in that situation. But if you get into a situation where you need to take care of yourself, you obviously need a roof over your head, and you need to buy food, and you've got bills to pay and things like that. When you're in that kind of situation, it becomes a little bit harder to do the right thing, especially if no one's really watching and everyone would kind of understand. And that's the tricky part about being a social worker. So so how do I approach that? How do I approach those values when I'm working with other people? I think right off the bat I think humor is obviously the greatest way to begin a relationship. I mean, the quickest way to start a relationship is to make somebody smile. After that, you just really need to listen to them, and then sometimes you bring them candy. People like candy. So the trick for me with working with other professionals is sometimes you need to be there for them. It's easier for them to go along with the things that you're going to say and do, and when they feel that you really care about them. So in the healthcare industry, I would work at my last job. I'd go into a hospital, and I would spend about an extra 15 minutes. I'd set down all my stuff and sit there and talk with the nurses who are case managers there, and some of the social workers at the hospital. And you let them vent to you. Everybody's stressed out and frustrated with their job, and you let them vent to you a little bit about it, and you smile, and you relate to them, and you let them know that that's what's going on. And after a while, what happens is that you have relationships with those people, and they're going to back you up. And so even if that means they have to stay an hour later from something that's completely inconvenient for a mutual client that you have, they're going to probably do it because in their eyes they're doing it for you, and you are somebody that they care about, that they value. So they're not going to believe the message of social work until they believe the messenger. So you've got to be prepared to do that. You've got to be able to have that kind of personality where you can really connect with other people not just the clients, but with the other professionals that you're working with. Because if you butt heads, that can create some really alienating positions at your job. So in the beginning, you're going to really want to focus on that, and that's where the balance is how do you maintain those relationships with those people, with other professionals, and then sometimes you're going to do things that are really unpopular with them. The answer to that one just kind of comes with experience, and you're going to have to kind of figure that one out on your own.